Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today. This webinar is about controlling your world with Control Bionics. And we are lucky enough to have Lane Riles with us from Control Bionics. Let's say, hey, Lane.
Thank you guys for having me.
All right, so I'm going to pass it over to Lane and let her tell you a little bit about Control Bionics and their devices.
Yeah, so in about 1989, Peter Ford, who is one of our creators of the Neuro node, he started recognizing that damaged muscles could still emit those electrical signals and impulses from the brain. So he originally started with James Shorey, who's our chief technical officer. They worked in conjunction and started the Neuro switch, which then went into the Neuro educator for that neuromuscular retraining. They were able to have Stephen Hawking, which is pretty cool, I think, try out the Neuro switch to control his wheelchair at the time. Then we kind of branched into Bluetooth switching with the Neuro node, and then it became the Neuro node. And then we said, okay, well, what about using that then to access AAC? And now we're continuing to do more in terms of access outside of communication. So right now, most of our controlling is going through a speech generating device, but we're developing more control outside of these speech generating devices. As users are saying, hey, look, I want to be able to control X, Y, and Z, we're trying to find ways that we can kind of branch into that and develop that more. So this is the NeuroNode Trilogy. It is a speech generating device. It is a 3-in-1 solution for those who are living with paralysis and loss of speech. So there is touch access, traditional eye gaze with dweller blink, and then the wearable EMG technology of the NeuroNode. When the two of them, eye gaze and the NeuroNode, so eyes are your mouse and the NeuroNode is in your click, it's a faster speed and reduced fatigue for our users, and it does allow for flexible access options. So because all of those users and control options are built into the device, then you can customize those and use those to meet user-specific needs. So like I have some of my users with ALS who earlier in the day, they feel like they can use the eye gaze alone. And then as the day goes on and they grow more fatigued, being able to combine those two can then reduce fatigue and make it faster.
I really like that because eye fatigue is a real thing.
Yeah.
So to be able to have another option other than dwell click is really nice.
Yeah. So again, 3 access methods in the one: traditional eye gaze, switch scanning, and that is like using an auditory scan for users, and then the NeuroNode is that wearable switch. So instead of having a fixed switch, it's on their person, and you can be using either the spatial settings, which is there's a built-in accelerometer within the NeuroNode. So your movement from space, which helps filter out some of those unintentional movements, and we can capitalize on intentional movement for your switch activation, or with the EMG, which is taking those microvolts of movement from the brain to the muscle group that we want to target to be the switch activation. And then using those two in combination, so the eye gaze with the NeuroNode, or any combination of those at any point. So these are our 2 current offerings, we'll say. So the NeuroNode Trilogy on the left, they're both Windows devices. The NeuroNode Trilogy is based off of a Windows Surface Pro. So it's got a little bit faster processor, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but Ashley and I were discussing, depending on your user's needs, that's when we're going to kind of go down and do almost like a pros and cons. Like, what is it that you specifically want the device to be able to do for you in terms of communication? And then again, for environmental control, it's going to have a faster processor. That's the NeuroNode Trilogy will have a faster processor. But the GridPad Trilogy has the infrared control and RF built in. So radio frequency control as well. So each one has benefits, and then, but again, it's just going to depend on your user and what they want the device to do for them. So there's your comparison in terms of the device, the cameras that are on it, the screen. The communication software is Grid 3 from SmartBox on both of the devices, and both of them offer that 3 access methods in the one system. So this is the Neuro node, and I'll show you mine too. It does have 24-hour active battery life. Whoops, I turned myself off. I have my controller, it must be on space, which sometimes will turn my camera off. I'll have to change that in a second. 24-hour active battery life and less than 2 hours to be fully charged. Honestly, I found like 45-ish minutes that'll have enough charge for a user to be able to use it. It's small and compact. It has the spatial and EMG modes that I just discussed. It is durable, and it is iOS and Windows compatible. We do have an iOS system that we offer. I have less users who are using an iOS system, but it is available if that's the preference. Again, to control whatever it is that your user wants to control. This is what comes in the NeuroNode kit. So the NeuroNode itself, electrodes. So we have adhesive and non-adhesive options. The Neuro band is our non-adhesive option. If you have a smaller movement that you're trying to target, I always think about my client with SMA who uses his thumb. So we have electrodes here, and then the reference on his elbow, and the NeuroNode itself clips into the adapter base. And is placed then on his clothing, so we can use the electrodes with the lead wires. And there is a charger, the cable, and the wall port. But that's what a NeuroNode kit looks like. Again, you have non-adhesive and adhesive options. And then there's a world of placement options available to you. These are probably our most common placements. For EMG. I do not know why that keeps pausing. Hold on. Technical difficulties. Hold on just a second.
Always technical difficulties. So I just want to clarify what the NeuroNode is exactly. So yes. Typically in the augmentative communication device world, speech therapy, we deal a lot with external switches, ability switches. We just typically call them switches. And that is basically a button. Well, it's usually a button that the user can activate to send, to allow a signal, just like a button, like your keyboard or something of that nature. And there's a variety of different kinds of switches out there in the world. And typically we would use switches in communication to allow someone to activate one of their communication grids, select a message on their grid, or switch scan, which means they can click a switch to get to what they want, and then they click a switch that activates it. In this case, the NeuroNode is using electrodes to detect your muscle movement, and that is your switch. So it doesn't require that physical effort from someone to press a button, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yes, thank you. That was a good explanation. Thank you, Ashley. So again, lots of different options in terms of placement. You're good. And then, so when do you choose EMG versus the spatial? So if you have a candidate who maybe is fatiguing easily, because again, we're taking microvolts of movement. So the tiniest of movements, it may not be visible. It doesn't have to be a functional movement as long as it's intentional movement. So you may then choose that for EMG for that type of user. And then if you have someone who maybe has tactile defensiveness, the NeuroNode in spatial mode can be placed over clothing, which kind of gives that some flexibility. Also, if you have someone with fasciculations or tremors, we can filter that out. So we can say, if we have a fasciculation, but I can make this movement intentionally, we can say that's my switch activation. That's my click, basically.
Okay. So that's that's really high tech. And it's really an awesome system for communication or computer access even, because when you purchase one of these systems, it not only has communication software built in, but it gives the user access to a computer. What it also does is provide options for adding environmental control. So what is environmental control? That is using technology to activate things in your environment and manipulate, manage items in your environment, like your lights. Like Alexa can turn on and off your lights, or you can use a smartphone app to unlock your front door. Those are environmental control. That's environmental control technology. Why is it beneficial to add that to an augmentative communication device? Well, for me, it's like, why not? Why not use that device for environmental control? Because it increases the value of that device. One of the issues that we hear quite commonly in the AugCom world from service providers is the device ends up sitting in a closet and it's not being used because the user is just not ready to use it for communication yet. Well, if we can add environmental control to that, we're adding value to that device, then maybe it won't get shoved in a closet somewhere. It can also increase independence. So we now have a device that allows this user with significant physical limitations to access a computer. And by adding the environmental control, we're now increasing their independence. They're able to turn their lights on and off themselves, adjust their thermostat. And when we increase that independence, we're decreasing the dependence on someone else to be there. So you don't necessarily need a caregiver there 24/7 because the user is able to do a lot of these things themselves and increase their independence. It's also going to increase their experience using the device. So for example, a patient with ALS may be, they may get a device recommended for them for communication because it's understood that with ALS, they may lose their ability to verbalize, to communicate. And so they may go ahead and get a system before they lose their communication ability, their verbal communication ability. Well, if we don't offer them an option to go ahead and start using their device and learning how to use it, then they may never want to use it for communication when they need it. So especially, I mean, with communication, that's something that we see a lot of people are like, well, you know, I would rather just use my typical modes for communication. But if we can increase their experience with this device, maybe they won't be so apprehensive in using it when it comes to communication. Lane, do you have anything you want to add to that? About that? We realized in creating this presentation that we both get very passionate about making sure the device is super useful.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think everything that you said is 100% true. And I do think, I mean, it's, to me, it's like we use technology so much for our communication, even if we have speech. And so to be able to allow people to have that and continue to have that, yeah, is a big deal. I get a little passionate, like Ashley said.
We had to rein ourselves in a little bit. Okay, so here's another thing. I mean, we were creating content for this up until the last minute because it is very complex, and that's the whole point of this webinar, is to at least give you an introduction to how to set this up for a user. But there are multiple ways that you can actually connect devices and control devices through the SmartBox software on the Control Bionics device. What Lane and I think, agree on is that the easiest way to do that is by using applications. So if you can look for an application that controls your device through the internet, that is going to be the easiest way to do this. You can do that by downloading the app from the Microsoft App Store that's on the device, because the device is a PC. It is a computer.
Yes.
And so it would be no different than going on your laptop, using the Microsoft App Store and downloading an app that controls your device. You can also look for a website application. So some smart devices specifically have website portals that you can go to, log into your account, and control your device from the internet. The second simplest solution, we think, in our opinion, is if you have a smart home system, or if the user has a smart home system already in place, like Alexa or Google Home, you can just program phrases into their communication grid that will activate one of those smart speakers. So I would say that it's fairly easy to start implementing these smart home systems with Alexa and Google, and it's relatively inexpensive to get started, because you can buy a $30 Echo Dot and then just gradually add on to that and build your system, rather than going and spending $4,000 on something really super high tech and complex. So these systems are very easy to use. They're easy to set up. You usually set it up through a smart device. And a lot of people have already started with the basics of at least having a smart speaker. And so if they have that, then just go onto the device and program in the phrases, and we'll show you how to do that in a minute. Lane, do you want to talk about the Cosmos just like very briefly, and then we'll talk about it more in depth later?
Yeah, sounds good. So the Cosmos Connect is one of our newer pieces of technology. This is an old version actually, but it seems like a switch box, but what it's used for is to then use the Neuro node. It connects to these speech generating devices to then use the Neuro node to control up to 8 outputs. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about this kind of as we go through.
And the one that's at the bottom of the list, because we feel like it is the most difficult part of it, and really requires, it required a lot from us on our end to even look into how to do it. I mean, we do think that there could be some improvements to the support that users can get for setting these devices up.
We're hoping this is like the intro to that,
yes.
Increasing the support.
Yeah, so if if this is something you're super interested in, and you would like us to go more in depth in future webinars or providing training on this, please let us know. Give us some feedback on that, because the signal transmission portion of it can be a little difficult. You can run into some technical issues. You may need to be a little creative with it. You may need to have a good understanding of what signal transmission means and the different types of transmitters that your devices use. However, we do know that the Control Bionics devices can control your environmental devices through either infrared, which is IR, radio frequency, which is RF. There is a Z-Wave option also, and some smart home devices I know are using Z-Wave. Lane, am I missing anything?
Nope, I think that's it.
Okay, so just a quick note, some of these signals may require an adapter to be able to use them. Okay, so let's go a little bit more in depth on the different ways to connect your devices. So I'll start by showing you how to do a web app.
on web, then web search. In search bar.
Was that playing my sound initially?
Not at the very beginning. No.
Okay, let me go back. That's what I was thinking. Now it is though, right?
What I
Yes.
want to be able to do is control the web application for my Akobe smart thermostat with my communication device. So this is how I set it up on my device. I'm going to open up Grid 3. This time let's use the Fast Talker set, which has some default web apps already. I'll click on web, then web search. In search bar, I'll type Akobe, then locate the website on Google and log into my account. Then I'll click Favorites, Add Favorite, select the cell where I want to add my favorite web page. I want to edit the icon, so I'll click on the 3-line menu icon, click Edit Grid, select the Akobe cell, and then click Edit in the column on the left. Now I need to find the Akobe site on the web favorites list, edit the label, and change the icon. Here I can actually go to a web search and find a picture of the Akobe. Once I click OK and it goes back to the edit grid page, I'm going to finish editing, save my changes, and then I want to activate my icon just to make sure it goes to the desired page. This type of setup works really great for web applications that you can simply tab through to adjust the controls. At the bottom of the page there are previous link and next link buttons that the user can use like tab on the keyboard, then the user would select activate to click. Unfortunately, what I quickly realized on the Akobe web app is that it's not super AT friendly, so it only tabs through 2 controls. But that's okay, we can use computer control. So if I go back to Fast Talker and select computer control, it's now going to give me mouse controls on the right hand side of my screen that will allow me to access everything on my computer. So if I pull up Google Chrome, I can access the web page and all the controls, including the temperature slider bar. If I click more on my mouse controls and select drag, just be sure to favorite or pin the tab for the web app so it's easier for your user to locate.
Also, I just wanted to make a note in that when you were in the web browser, if you go to, there's a little link button there, it will show you all of the links on the page to make it a little bit more accessibility friendly. So that's another option too. Yeah.
Yeah, and so one of the things that I want to stress is that there are so many different ways to do things in this device that I should have said this before. Whatever we show you today may not be the only way to do it. And
or the best way.
Right. Especially with me right now, I'm just kind of playing with it. I don't have a ton of experience with the device. I'm kind of showing you things of how I figured out how to do it. And so your best option would be to go back to the rep like Lane and ask what is a good way to do that. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing because Lane, I think it would be time now for you to share how to use an app that comes from the Windows or the Microsoft App Store.
Sure. So what I did is I was working on programming my Roku remote because I don't have a whole lot of smart technology myself in my home, but I do have a Roku. So I wanted to know, like, how can I go through and control my remote through my device, because the remote that I have has infrared, but it also has, which this is also something that Ashley and I kind of ran into, like, oh, great, there are multiple forms of control within this one remote. So there is RF, but there's also IR. So I was like, well, there's got to be some way for me to have, because like I have an app on my phone to control my Roku remote. So I just went through and looked. Oops. And I did, hold on, let's see. I think I ended up doing that. So a Roku remote for an Android. So Android is going to be any of those Windows-based devices. And then I went into my Google Play Store and then installed that there. I didn't like that one as well. So I ended up with, can you still see this? It opened up. Okay, good. So I ended up adding this one. No, you can't.
Open up an app because we don't see it.
Yes. Okay. Hold on
Sorry.
a second. You're fine.
We can see your Google search.
Yeah. So then I opened up my app. Now, can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. So then I, like I said, I added this one. I kind of preferred it in terms of using it to control. But again, I just went through the web and looked up that Roku remote for Android.
And so a quick way to find the App Store, instead of having to do like a Google search, if you will just hit the little search bar on the computer portion of the device, and then
I'm going to show
type
you.
in App Store, it should pop up your
There's your Microsoft Store. Oops.
yeah, your Microsoft App Store. And then you can search within the Microsoft Store for an app that matches your device that you're trying to control. I do go to the web a lot and search for the app stores, but this is a quick way to do it through your device as well. And so what I showed is an option when there may not be an app in your app store that the device developer has made to control your device through the internet. What I showed was a portal that you go to the website and you log in, you can control your device. What Lane is showing you is an actual application like what you would download on your iOS device if you go to the Apple App Store. However, this would be the Microsoft Store for their devices. And it basically serves as a remote for your device through the internet. Okay, so Lane, you want to move on to the second option, which is controlling your smart home devices through either Alexa or Google Home, and how you would set up phrases on the communication device?
Yes. Hold on just a second. Let me, all this changing screens.
Yeah.
So let's minimize that and X out of that. So in grid 3, within a lot of these grid sets for communication, there's going to be another, they have built-in type controls. So this specific one is for Alexa, but there's also a Google Home one. So all you have to do then is program. Oh, I'm not sharing
Alexa,
my sound.
What is the time?
Share sound. Hold on a second.
Alexa, what is the time?
I always like to do this in presentations because inevitably somebody's Alexa will start talking back to them. But then to change that, we're going to go to the menu, edit grid. So some of these are already pre-programmed. Like I had a user who he had it programmed where Samuel L. Jackson was his assistant. And so his was Samuel and then whatever the command is that you wanted. But to do so, you'll just select your new cell. Here where it says write, you're going to put Alexa and then whatever your command is. Then as simple as that, you're going to finish editing. And it should have asked me if I wanted to save my changes. Maybe I didn't make a change, so it didn't ask. I feel like I can't come up with anything other than what's already there.
Unlock front door.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So then drawing a blank. Thank you, Ashley. Oops. And if I could spell and type. Okay. Oh, you know what? Hold on a second.
While you're doing that, another thing I want to clarify is that Lane mentioned going into grid 3, and I think I did too initially, but we didn't explain what grid 3 is. Lane, that's the communication software that is
Correct.
installed on the Control Bionics devices.
That's correct. Yes.
All
Okay.
right.
So I lied. We're going to add to the word list. So it will add to these icons. And then we're going to say, oh, okay. But it's normally not this difficult. I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong here. And I know it's user error.
But that's the nature of technology and trying to demonstrate technology.
Right.
It's always going to be a little finicky. But, you know, we're going to show our flaws so that you guys know this is not.
You're not alone.
Yes, this is even individuals who use technology a lot are going to run into some of these technical issues in programming this, and we don't want you to get discouraged by that and give up. If you're trying to help somebody set up environmental control on their communication device and you're really running into some issues, then reach out to the reps and ask for some advice on what to do.
I don't know why it's not giving me an actual space to type. It's letting me search, but it's not actually letting me type into the cell. So I'll do a little investigating, but normally you would just edit the word list. So that was here, edit word list. Normally you have just to add, and then it will allow you to start typing. So I'm not exactly sure what's happening right now, honestly.
We'll blame it on Zoom. Sometimes I
Yeah.
run into some things the applications don't act the same when I'm on Zoom than when
I'm honestly not sure. Or if I need a grid 3 update, I'm not sure. So, but that's how you would do it.
So this
normally.
it's very simple to set up in the device. And it's part of the Grid 3 software, and Grid 3 has a lot of different what's called grid sets, correctly?
Yes.
I don't want to say the wrong thing. There's all these different
Perfect.
grid sets that a user could choose from to use. And so there's a lot of things that are already pre-programmed. Now you can customize these and edit them as much as you want, but like the one she was using was Alexa, and it was like an Alexa page that was already set up, and then you would go in and customize that Alexa page. And it just gives you a head start really on setting this up and customizing it for a user.
Yeah, and so there's an Echo one too that's already started, and then you can just add easily to it. Even the user could add some of these on their own using their eye gaze.
And just like you would do on your smartphone, you could reorganize the grid sets inside Grid 3 to make it more easily accessible to your user. So you can move all of those things around.
Yeah, so you can do that within this page. So if we wanted to, and it's just simple hold and drag, or even within each grid set, yeah, you can make any of those changes when you're editing. So we'll go here.
And if you didn't see what she just did, she clicked on the menu icon at the top and selected arrange grid. And then it allowed her to move stuff around, and then she had to go back up there and say finish arranging.
Yeah, and so now I'm within a grid set, and if I wanted to arrange it in some sort of way, I went back to that 3-line menu and edit grid this time. And then, yeah, you can click, hold and drag and do all kinds of edits, and then finish editing, yes, to save the changes, and all of those changes will be made there.
So it's like apps within apps within apps.
Yeah. Kind of.
Which one are you on right now? Fast Talker?
This is Fast Talker, yes.
Okay, so if, like you were explaining to me the other day, if a client chooses Fast Talker as their preferred grid set, here's the apps that are defaulted in there, but you can pull in some additional things to the Fast Talker grid set. If you create pages elsewhere for the user, you can pull those into this nice, neat fold. It's basically like a folder within Grid 3 called Fast Talker, and it's set up really nicely to use. So if your user prefers that particular grid set, then you would just modify this, however. And you could put like Alexa as one of those main buttons on there if that's one of the options that they're frequently going to use.
Right. And this one is a combination of Alpha Core and Fast Talker. I like it because for your messages, it's like you're talking about, actually, you have folders within folders. That kind of has already pre-programmed messages within, including, of course, I'm not going to be able to see it. Maybe it's an entertainment.
And so what we're showing you here is you wouldn't necessarily have to just go to that Alexa grid page that's defaulted in. You could actually add Alexa phrases in here, right, Lane?
Yeah, you
Like
could. Or if you wanted to add Alexa to it, so you can go edit grid. And then on this grid set file, oops, little tab across the top, you can add from another grid set. So it will show you all of the grid sets that you have within Grid 3, and then I could select to add all the pages associated with Alexa into this particular grid set. So that way you're not having to navigate out to, because you'll see as we kind of go along too, there's some extra like external type pages, but you can always build them into whatever communication pages and software that they're using to add it in. So they only have to be in one grid set technically.
So
I'm sure that's as clear as mud.
Right. Long story short, there's millions of ways to do what you're wanting to do. And particularly with Alexa, it's easy to set up either in somebody's communication board or on the Alexa page or through environmental control, whatever. It's easy to do, but they're gonna need that system set up through your smart device first. So you would have to set it up through the Alexa app, make sure all your devices are connected, and then you're just using the communication device to say the phrase. Okay, so let's go back because we want to talk about now the Cosmos. So here's a short video on Cosmos. Am I sharing my sound now? Yes, okay.
Yep.
Pinball. Peggle.
Scan through.
2 switch toy. iPhone. Grid 3. MacBook. Obi. Deliver.
Just wake it up.
Rotate. Deliver.
That's still waking up, isn't it?
You're ready to
Rotate.
go.
Okay.
Deliver.
Feed me.
Rotate. Deliver. Rotate.
Waiting.
Deliver.
Yeah. Let it
Rotate.
time out.
Yep. So if it
Deliver.
times, when it times out, it's gonna go back to
Obi.
the main screen.
So you go
Power
pedal
Star
now.
Golf.
And you can go to pedal. Yep.
Pinball. Peggle. Aim left. Aim right. Stop.
I'm going for the next red one.
So this is using, originally it was the OB feeding robot, and this is using the Neuro node to control the Xbox,
Good one.
Stop.
playing the game Peggle.
Now it's back.
Oh, pretty well.
No, go for
Fire.
the pedal.
Aim left. Aim right. Stop.
Goes so quick to aim left, aim right. Come on. Come back.
And so what you're seeing here is right under the device
Aim left.
here
Aim right.
is the Cosmos
Let it
that
time
you
out
can
now.
plug into your external devices. It can control up to 8 wired devices and 1 Bluetooth device based on what I saw on
Pinball.
the internet, the World Wide Web. And so they have that
Switch toy.
connected to
iPhone.
their
Select item.
Neuro node trilogy
Select
there.
item.
And then it's connected to their other devices. And one of the devices he was using was the OB feeding robot, and the other one is the Xbox. And he's using the Neuro node on his wrist
It's gonna take a
to
break.
send the switch signal that he wants for him. Is there anything else we need to just explain, Lane?
No, I think that's it, just for kind of an overview of what it is. So now you can see he's using it to control his iPhone as well.
And that would be in the Bluetooth setting, correct?
Yes, yep.
And then probably you can wait till time's out and you can.
And you can see on the NeuroNode Trilogy, it's being controlled through that. It's scanning through the options of what your functions are. So you can see there, like to go home or go into your control settings, control center, all of those types of things. So it scans through that. He makes his movement to then control the external device.
Scan menu.
So is it doing automatic switch scanning? Just
Power
not
start
switch
off.
scanning, but just it's scanning and then he activates it when it gets to the icon he wants to activate?
That's correct. There's no eye gaze with that piece of it at the moment.
Grid 3.
Okay. And as you can see, I mean, he's now used 3 different devices in 3 minutes. So it's fairly easy to switch between the devices that you have connected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Perfect.
that's been good.
Yeah. Perfect.
There's a smile there.
Okay. Lane, is there anything that you would like to talk about in regards to the Cosmos?
I think that's it. I mean, I think in terms of if you have a user who is interested in controlling things outside of one of our devices, oh, I'm sorry, let me turn my camera back on too, outside of one of the devices, then we should have that conversation. I do want to mention though, at this point, the Cosmos is not insurance fundable. So it is like an add-on additional purchase to that if they have something that they want to control and something of that nature.
Yeah, so basically, if your device doesn't work in the way that we're showing you other options today to connect it to the GridPad or the NeuroNode Trilogy, the GridPad Trilogy or the NeuroNode Trilogy, if there's not a way to automatically connect it the way we're showing you other options, then you could do the Cosmos add-on. And you can hardwire, like I said, 8 devices or connect 1 device via Bluetooth.
Yeah. And the eight is going to be like your switch output. So with the NeuroNode sending out, normally it just sends out 1 HID code. So this then gives you 8 outputs versus just the 1 single. So you're using that single NeuroNode though to do 8 codes essentially.
That's really cool. But like you said, it's not funded by insurance. So if this is something that the user wants to be able to do, they are going to have to purchase it as a separate add-on. And so just keep that in mind if you need to consider that. Okay, so let's get to the nitty-gritty here. Using infrared, which one of the devices has built in, and so we're going to spend a little bit more time on that. What is infrared? If you're not familiar, that's a type of signal transmission that's found in some remotes, and most likely it's going to be in older remotes for older televisions or like a universal remote. I also found that, you know, like my tower fan remote, which I'm going to show you how I connected that to the device, uses IR, but not the remote that I use for my Tempur-Pedic to adjust the angle of my bed, and not my electric shades that I have in my house. Those use Bluetooth, and so I was not able to connect using those remotes. But IR usually is going to require a direct line of sight to the device because it sends a straight signal to your device. And so if you have a device where if somebody's standing in front of you and you're hitting the button on the remote and it's not activating your device, you most likely have an IR remote. Newer technology, like Lane briefly mentioned earlier, newer technology may have some buttons like power and volume on the remote that use IR and some buttons that use RF. One very good, frustrating example that we discovered was Lane's Roku remote and my Fire TV remote here. You can see the Fire TV remote. So my power button and my volume buttons use infrared. All the other buttons use radio frequency. And, you know, my husband's kind of a techie, and I was like, why do they do that? That's so frustrating. And he was explaining that a lot of companies have switched to radio frequency because it can go through walls. You don't have to have that direct line of sight to the device. So how do you know if your remote, what's a really kind of foolproof way to tell if your remote has the button uses IR? So if I point this at a digital camera and I press the button and you see that little light that's reflecting into the camera, that is an IR signal. If I look at this directly, I can't see it with my naked eye, but you can see it when you point it at a digital camera. So that's a good telltale way to tell if your signal is IR. Lane, would you like to describe the difference in the devices and the IR control?
Yeah, so the GridPad Trilogy is going to have what is built-in IR and the radio frequency control. I'll be honest with y'all, I haven't really delved into the RF control within the GridPad. Ashley and I were having enough experience with the IR at this point, I think. But so I haven't really gotten into the meat of that part, but it is something that's now on my list to do and look into. If you were to get, or if you had a user who was getting the NeuroNode Trilogy, it does require an add-on, which is also not insurance fundable. But there are a couple of options. Because the eye gaze camera is using the only USB port on the Surface Pro, you do have to unplug mine. A USB splitter. So that just gives you more ports. And then there are a couple of options in terms of infrared control. So this is the USB UIRT. And again, it just plugs into the USB. You do have to make sure, I learned the hard way, that you have the correct drivers installed on your device. But that goes through, usually the company will have, like I know for the USB UIRT, they have on their website the particular drivers available. Same for this other one is the BJ Live. Same thing, it's using the USB, but you just have to make sure that you have the correct software and or drivers downloaded onto the device to then be able to use it for the IR control.
Okay, so to reiterate, if you are interacting with a consumer and they would like to add environmental controls to, so you go to their house, you see that they have their Control Bionics device. Ooh, it makes me disappear. You see Control Bionics on the device. And they want to implement environmental control, and they want to be able to use their remote for their TV. If you will look at the device and just see, it's so hard because my background's making me disappear. On the device.
I think there's a picture somewhere.
On the device, there's a label. If it says GridPad, then it should have built-in IR and RF control. If the device says NeuroNode Trilogy, like that device that was in the last video with the Cosmos, at the top of the device, it looked like a little guitar pick, I think, and it said NeuroNode. If it says that, then they will have to have an adapter plugged in to their device to send IR signals. And those two adapters are two options that you can use to plug into the device. Now, the GridPad Trilogy is supposed to have built-in RF. The loaner device that I have currently, I could not find the RF transmitter inside the device. And so maybe it was uninstalled unintentionally, because this was a user's device. And so just know that you may run into the same issue that I did, but it's supposedly supposed to be there. So
yes,
you should then be able to control like a Roku remote or a Fire TV remote, because you would have both IR and RF transmitters built into the device. I hope
Correct.
that makes it.
Well,
sense.
and this is something that Ashley, you and I had talked about too, but I am trying to, as the representative for Control Bionics, trying to really delve into with our users before they're acquiring a device. What is it that you want to use this device for? You know, we talked about earlier, if they were looking for a faster processor or whatever, then I may say the Neuro Trilogy. But if IR and that now RF, like I said, which I have not looked into all that in depth at this point. If those are the features that are really important to you and that's really what you're looking for, then I'm probably going to suggest you really be considering that GridPad trilogy. So that you can already have all of that in that device itself is fundable through insurance. So if that's something that's really important to you, then I'm going to probably be encouraging you to really look at that and trial that device and see if it's doing the things that you want it to do. And if those things are really important to you, because I do know for me too, there have been times where I'm like, well, this is super important to me. And then in reality, I'm not using it in that way, even though I fully intended to. So that's something to consider as well.
It's built into the GridPad trilogy. It's not an add-on. So that means
Yes,
you're basically getting insurance coverage by selecting the GridPad trilogy.
right, because
Okay.
it's already included.
So before I show this video, can you share your screen and show us how you would typically add at least an IR device in the Grid 3?
Yep. So let me plug this one back in. Sorry. I unplugged it to show y'all and then
We messed her up.
no, I did that to myself.
We talked about how much swapping back and forth we would do during this presentation. So we appreciate you guys for being patient.
Yes.
Let's do that because we really want to show you all the things.
All right. So if I am going in to my settings, so I'm within Grid 3. I went to that 3-line menu and I'm going to go here to this environmental control over on the left in the blue.
Can you show us what, the transmitters that we were talking about?
Is this part that you wanted? Yeah, so here's the transmitters. Once you go into that environmental control, it's going to show you these transmitters. So it's telling me I've had my BJ control connected before, but it's telling me that this one, the UUIRT through the USB is there and available. If I wanted to add another one, I'm just going to click add, and it's again going to depend on which is required for your device. And again, a lot of times these devices are going to tell you, whether that be through their website or user guide or whatever, what form of transmitter it is. And then I would also, if you run into trouble, you can do like I did and reach out to Smartbox through thinksmartbox.com. And typically they can walk you through and say, oh yeah, that's going to be one of these particular transmitters that's using this. You would need this to run that, basically.
If you're confused, you're not alone.
So are we.
I have bugged Lane for like 6 months about how do I know which transmitter to use. And so the 2 transmitters that are showing up on her device, because she has the Neuro trilogy,
yes,
those are those external adapters that you can purchase as an add-on. Now the device that I'm using right now is the GridPad. And so the transmitters that showed up on mine was that Jiwa and Giwa, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, and the IR trans. Can you go back and show us how to add, like if you were going to program a TV remote?
yes. So
once you know that your transmitters are there, they're installed, they're being detected. You also want to make sure that it says that it's detected. If you noticed, her BJ Live said it was not detected. You want to double check those.
sorry, I'm trying to drag us around, so I'm not. So if we're going to do this now to program our remote, you're going to go into this service. That's going to be the environmental controls. And then you're going to go into, oh, I picked the wrong one because this one's kind of with that color. I don't
Well,
love that.
can you go back to the environmental control and settings and just show what it looks like if you want to go ahead and set up your default television remote?
Yeah. I was just going to choose a different grid set because that one was, the color was kind of,
Yeah.
let's see if we go into service. So here's, if you wanted just to do your television remote, you're going to go to that 3-line menu, edit grid. You're going to highlight the particular cell, and then you're going to ask it to learn. Go back. You're going to ask it to learn it. And then it's going to say start learning. I'm going to take my remote and I'm going to point it at the USB. What did I do? Power, Ashley?
So it depends on which device you have. If you have the Neuro node, you're going to point it at that adapter. If you
Right.
have the grid pad, it tells you to point it up at the top left part of your screen.
There we go. I finally got it.
Follow those prompts. Whatever comes up, you're going to follow.
Yep. So you're going to ask it to learn it.
And so what Lane did is she went ahead and went into the Fast Talker grid set and then found a television page, which is already set up to recognize television commands from your default television device. And so she's going in and now she's teaching it specifically to her remote, which IR signal to send.
Right. I like, and Ashley and I have discussed this, I kind of like the set box top because it has more things already set up. Then you're just programming it from your remote. My favorite part of the set box top is this favorites. So they have it set up where it's already programmed for each of these providers, but you can go in and edit all of these. So like for, if I wanted to tune ABC, it's automatically, instead of having to push 108 and activate all of those separately, it's going to go ahead and send that infrared signal to the television and then change the channel to that.
And so it does take a little bit of setup in the beginning because you are having to teach the Control Bionics system and the Grid 3 software what those IR signals are coming from your specific remote. So you've got to go in and program each of the buttons on your remote that you want to use. However, let me show.
Yep, let me stop.
Let me show you this, which we learned, which was pretty cool. If you go to, let me see. If you go to if you go to thinksmartbox.com and you find their pre-recorded IR remote files, you should be able to download these. And I'm going to show you real quick because I didn't show this in the video I'm about to show you. You want to make sure that it's installed to the right location on the device. So then, make sure, I don't have any sound for this one, so we should be good. But you can you see the video?
Yeah, I see the website still, not the video yet.
I need to stop share because I shared the wrong thing. Share this. Okay, so here's the video of how you would go through and download one of those pre-recorded files for your remote. And then you don't have to go through the trouble of programming every single button to the device.
They've done the hard work for you.
Yes, they have. SmartBox did this for you. So, you know, what I would do if I had a consumer who didn't already have a device, like a TV that could be used for this, I would go to the SmartBox website and look at which TVs are already compatible and programmed, and then recommend that the consumer buy that TV. But if they already have one of these TVs, then you have an advantage here. So you're going to go to thinksmartbox.com. In the search bar, the easiest way to find it is to type pre-programmed into the search bar, or pre-recorded, and then search that on their website. Then you'll find the pre-recorded IR remote files. I didn't scroll all the way down like I should have to show you where it says to install those files, but that's a very important tidbit of information you need to know. So then you'll find which TV, or not TV remote, but which remote system. So you have an option between TVs, smart boxes, DVD. So smart boxes like Xbox One, DVD players, things like that. Find the remote. Hopefully it's there. If you're lucky, if it's your lucky day, your remote will be there. And so you're going to click that. It'll download the file. I accidentally clicked it twice because that's how I am. All right, so in order to change where it was located on my computer, I had to click on that and open file, and then I'm going to click on the file and click copy. Now I want to navigate in the device to the folder that is specified on that website. All right, and then I'm going to click paste it, and now when I go to grid 3 and I go to the menu at the top eventually, and I can click settings, go to environmental control, Ashley. Now you'll see that the LG Smart TV is automatically programmed in there. And if I was going to primarily use that TV as my device for that page, that preset grid page, then I can actually click that and make it my default so that the page will automatically use those commands from that device when I start messing with the grid page. Okay, here's another complex thing. Thankfully I have a video for this because it took me a long time to figure this out. So this is where, a lot of consumers, if they are at home in their bed a lot, let's say they have quadriplegia or some other disability that causes difficulty with maintaining their body temperature. I love for individuals to be able to control fans, electric blankets, thermostats to help with that, because that prevents them from feeling like a burden. Like I know a lot of consumers who won't ask somebody to come turn the fan on for them and it's stifling hot in their room because they don't want to keep calling their caregiver in just to turn off the fan. Then in 30 minutes they get cold, so they need the fan to be turned off. And so it's sort of liberating, I think, to have access to these types of devices. And why shouldn't you? And so
Absolutely.
Luckily, my tower fan that I use at home uses an IR remote. It doesn't have that newfangled RF technology. So here is how I set this
In
up.
the Grid 3 application, find the Service Environmental Control app. Open that app and select the Home icon. Next, select the Fan icon. Now we are on a pre-programmed grid page for a fan that uses a simple on-off command through a smart socket, but we're going to program a more complex fan. To do that, we're going to click on the 3-line menu icon, select Settings, then Environmental Control Settings. This software does not have a default device for a fan, so what I'm going to do is get a little creative here and explore the different device types to find one that has enough action types to program in the 7 functions that I want to use on my fan. The action labels are not going to match the action type for my fan, but mainly I just need enough actions. I look at the blinds, which has 8 actions, then I look at intercom, but that only has 5, so I'm going to go back to blinds. I want to go ahead and change the name to tower fan so there isn't any confusion moving forward, and then I'm going to start learning my buttons. Select the action you want to program, then click Learn. You'll follow the prompts on the screen for each button, which will tell you when to press and release your remote and if there's any errors. It may take several tries to get the right distance and angle for it to pick up your remote signal, but once a successful series of signals is received, it will return back to the accessory action page and the button will turn green. Here is where I encourage you to click the Transmit Now button to send a test signal to your device to make sure the signal programmed successfully, because mine did not. What I discovered in this process is that because my remote has buttons that have different signal outputs each time you hit the same button, it was learning a command that was different than what I intended. It took a few attempts at trial and error to figure out which sequence to hit my buttons to get the command I wanted. In my case, if I wanted to program the power on command, I needed my fan on when I start learning so that the initial button turns it back off and the sequence of button hits following that picks up on the on command. It just takes patience, trial and error, and outsmarting the technology. But that's the nature of IR technology. So here I'm going to learn each button by repeating the process, keeping a mental note of which fan action is programmed to which blind action, although I highly recommend making a hand note. Click OK to get back to the grid. Select the menu and edit grid. Then you can start repositioning the default icons and add the additional icons you want to use for your new commands. And you can also change the label and the image for each icon. After that, you'll need to go in and select each icon, delete any default actions that are programmed, blinds, and then select the action in blinds for that icon. You can test each of the icons to make sure they work by using the Transmit Now button on the left side. When you're finished and all done, you can click Finish Editing, save your work, then test each of the buttons to make sure that they are all correctly set up. This is the fun part, because then you get to prove that all your hard work was worth it. Keep in mind, this was not the only way to program this type of fan into the device. This was just the way that I found worked for me. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I had to get pretty creative there. Just to clarify, when I hit the button on my remote to power it on, usually with my remote, I kind of have to wake it up. So I hit the button and then I hit it again, it powers it on. And then when I hit it again, it'll power it off. And so because that same button sends multiple signals, another example would be the power of the fan. How hard do I want the fan to blow? You hit the same button and it'll go high, medium, low. And so when I was programming that with those prompts that the grid pad's telling me to use, I'm not sure at which prompt, which time I turn it on and off, it's actually picking up the signal and going to save that signal. And so I had to kind of trial and error it until to figure out, okay, so if I want my power on control, then initially I've got to have my fan on, then I turn it off when I hit the first prompt, then the second prompt, it powers back on, and then I finally was getting the right recorded signal. So it took a little finagling, and I did run into some issues making sure that it got the right signal. And then I also, as I said before, there wasn't a fan accessory in Grid 3 in the environmental control accessory options. And so I used the blind accessory because it had enough actions that I could do to program in my fan. So even though the labels didn't match what I was programming, that's okay. It's still programmed in that IR command. Lane, does that make sense? Is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, that does make sense. I do wonder though, if it would be easier for us to add that fan grid set and then just be editing the grid. So that way you wouldn't have to, do you know what I'm saying? It may be easier to do it that way, but obviously that way was very successful and I'm impressed with your fortitude because it was not easy.
Yeah, so what I did was I just found a page that already was set up for a fan in the environmental control app and just kind of edited that. That fan that's defaulted is just like an on-off fan. It uses what the device is expecting it to use is like a smart plug. Where in a fan that has it where you always have it on, like a turn dial, where the fan is always in the on position. And so when you turn on that smart plug, it turns the fan on. When you turn off the smart plug, it turns it off. And so that's what the device is expecting you to use. But then I went and switched it back to an IR control device
Blinds.
for blinds. Yeah. Blinds. It was complicated, but we got it done. I just wanted to prove that it could be done.
That's right. Well, and that's another thing to consider too is, smart plugs are very simple and affordable too. If you have something that's going to just require that simple on off type thing, you may want your consumer to be looking into like the smart plugs in terms of control.
Yeah. And,
But I do like the fact that you went through and did every one of those commands that were available to that fan,
Yeah. And so it kind of shows you very quickly at a very sped up, it was like 1,000 times the speed. So this did take longer than it seemed. How you would go through and program each button that you want to program for your device. And at least when you're doing that, like one of the issues I've had with smart plugs with the consumer is when they lost their internet connection, when their internet went out, they then could not turn off their smart plug, and they had a heater plugged into their smart plug.
Oh no.
And it was bad because when the internet went out and he could not tell Google Home he didn't have this device, he didn't have a communication device, but he couldn't tell Google Home to turn off his heater. It got way too hot in his room. And it was
no.
And
that is dangerous.
Consider that, like, this is something it would be no different than using the remote for your fan or heater or whatever. Okay, so some quick tips, and these are just some notes that we wanted to talk about because there's some issues that we ran into while we were looking into all of this. First of all, if you're having trouble setting up a device, if you're having trouble setting up an environmental control device with a remote into the OGCOM device, just double check that your device actually uses IR. Easiest check, does it have a light that shows up when you press the button in a digital camera? If it doesn't, it could be either RF or Bluetooth. And those may require an adapter depending on which communication system the user is using. Also, you saw that there are several options for different transmitters within the Grid 3 system software. How do you know which transmitter to use? Well, we still don't know a solid answer for that, but we do know that sometimes you can look it up in your manual, the device manual, to figure out what your remote uses. You could maybe contact the manufacturer of your environmental control device. Like maybe I could have contacted the manufacturer for that fan to figure out what type of IR signal it's sending. If I was having trouble with the transmitter in my device detecting it. Also trial and error. So you could easily just use the little drop down box for which IR transmitter you're using and just keep trying each one to see, but it's going to be based on what's installed on your communication system. So don't trial and error through all of them. Only trial and error through the ones you know that are detected in the system. Okay. So another troubleshooting tip, if it's not activating, so you've got it all programmed, it worked, but it's not activating your environmental control device, like the fan, make sure that your OGCOM device has direct line of sight to the environmental control device that you're using. Because if you're using IR, there's a very good chance if there's any interruption between that signal, it's not going to activate the device that you're trying to manage. Lame. You want to talk about the drivers?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier, when we had met before, I was like, it should just be plug and play. Yeah, well, I didn't have the drivers that were necessary for my IR controls. So yeah, a lot of times if you have that, and I think I mentioned this earlier, talking about going to their website, and a lot of times for whatever the IR device is, they'll have listed the drivers and or the software that is required for each of those.
Yeah, so what she's talking about is if you had to plug in one of those adapters, just like if you were to plug in a mouse into your computer or keyboard or some other device in your computer, it needs those drivers. That's the software that the device uses to control your computer. And so you've got to make sure those drivers are installed if you have one of those adapters. So your best tip is going to be contact Control Bionics rep or SmartBox for support to see if they can give you any advice on what you're trying to do. And even Lane, through this process of us trying to figure this out, she reached out to them several times and they were almost like responsive right away almost every time, right? I mean,
yeah. So if you'll go to your Think SmartBox tab on your internet, this little chat window down in the bottom right hand, it is a chat and they are very responsive. I use that chat feature probably daily, multiple times daily, some days, just depending on what I'm working on. But yes, always use that feature. You can also search with the little magnifying glass up in the top right-hand corner. And a lot of times, yep, which Ashley did before, that will then give you like a resource guide, have printed things to walk you through from their knowledge base, which is really nice resource too.
Yeah, so if you'll go to thinksmartbox.com, if you search for environmental control, you're going to be able to get this page here that has several different resources. Although we wish there were more, we were impressed to know that they do have some things here for setting up different kinds of accessories on the device. And so I think the coolest one is the pre-recorded IR remote files. And then there are also some videos. And there's a blog section, which we have this video here as a resource, but
The thing that's different about
it's not going to show you.
a verbal
It's my
vacation home,
SmartBox.
you always have the whole place to yourself.
Let's see, using environmental control. That was a good blog.
Mm-hmm.
Controlling the world around you is what it was, I think.
Yep.
Does that sound right? Okay, so this is actually a blog post that they made that has a good video here on getting started with environmental control. And so that's a good resource for you. Okay, so here's Lane's contact information. Lane, do you mind putting that in the chat as well? At least
Not
your
at all.
email. Your email.
Yep.
And then I'm going to add these resources in the chat box. This is the direct link, but if you go to thinksmartbox.com and type that in using environmental control, that's going to give you that video to get you started adding environmental control, kind of similar to what we did here today, was take you through some options. Another resource to be sure of that you keep a note of is thinksmartbox.com. Search for should be pre-recorded, I think. Search for pre-recorded. This video and a couple of the videos that I recorded for setting stuff up is on our YouTube channel, Accessing Potential Through Assistive Technology. And you can also go to controlbionics.com to just learn more about the device. SmartBox is where you're going to find the environmental control stuff, though. Okay. All right. So we've already gone over our time because this was a lot. so much. Are there
Thank you for hanging with us, though.
Yeah, whoever stuck with us, thank you so much. Are there any questions that anyone has? Okay. All right. Well, I think most of who's here already has these other resources. I'm going to put them in, but other than that, we're going to end this so that, it's not too long to upload to YouTube. And just let us know if you have any questions. Y'all know how to reach out to me. Lane put her email in the chat box if you need it. And thank you for joining us today.